So let's talk about the prop rocket. Okay, the concept for this aircraft began right after Midway. So right there, that's one of the potential myth busters, was that this aircraft was designed specifically to, I've heard to defeat the Zero, to tackle the advanced Japanese aircraft that were being developed. That's not necessarily true. This is all the way to just after Midway, when Grumman got together with some of the Midway veterans and said, what do you need? What would have helped? And one of the big things, if you see that name, Jimmy Thatch went on to be a hugely important Navy fighter pilot, developing a tactic with our older Grummans to at least keep up with the Zero. So he went on to great things, and he started right here in this meeting saying what we need out of our fighters is climb rate. We need this thing to take off and get up to altitude right now. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, in bottom line engineering terms, you maximize the power to the weight. You have to be able to operate these things from the escort carrier. So the Navy already had a big picture of what they needed to do for their surface fleet as well as their aircraft to help with this fight that we are now very young in. But the larger fleet carriers, which were big enough to handle Big Brother over here, the Hellcat couldn't operate off these smaller escort carriers. So its sibling, if you will, needed to be able to operate off those smaller carriers. And here's another myth that you can read about, is that a lot of the design of the Bearcat came from the Focke-Wulf 190, the German plane. It's true that the Americans had captured 190s and had looked at it, and the Grumman engineers had been able to crawl all over it and see it. There are kind of, if you look at a 190, there's kind of some similarities to this tall, wide landing gear stance, the short nature of it. But the bottom line from the research I've done is that's a myth, and that the Grumman engineers used that airplane plus lessons learned that were coming in every day from the Pacific Theater to design this. Okay, so Grumman took about a year and a half. So we went from Midway-ish in 42 to late 43 before Grumman actually started designing and building this airplane. And they weren't taking a nap. They were dutifully engaged preparing that airplane and getting that off the production run and into the fleet squadrons. They also spent a great deal of time studying the carrier warfare as it was developing in the Pacific Theater. So as they got busy starting to design this airplane, go back to that this slide, maximize power to weight. So they took what at that time was the most powerful radial engine at the time, the R2800, same engine that powered the Hellcat and the Corsair and the P-47. So they took that and they said, what's the smallest and lightest airframe we can build around this engine? And that's what they did. They added the bubble canopy. The bubble canopy did, obviously it helps from the pilot. The pilot loves the visibility in the bubble canopy. That was a first for Navy fighters. But what it also did, when you talk about a light airplane, notice that immediately behind the canopy there is no fuselage, i.e. from, well, we can, I'm sorry, we've got the wing folded. Take a look at the Hellcat. From the top of the canopy, there's fuselage, there's aluminum right behind it as it tailors back into the vertical tail. Well, the bubble canopy allowed them to eliminate that. That's a little bit of savings. Okay, they used a slightly smaller prop. If you look at this giant back here, it's funny to call that a smaller prop, but relative to its bigger brother, it's a smaller prop, slightly. And some other weight-saving measures they did, they reduced the fuel on it. So it, less weight for takeoff is gonna help that climb rate. But what it also did for the Hellcat, this didn't have the great range that the Hellcat did. So that kind of, by doing that, Grumman helped their contracts to keep that thing being built, because that had to continue to do the longer range escort and fighter sweep and bombing missions. They went from the 6 guns that was in the Hellcat to 4, another bit of a weight saving measure. And the initial airplane had 50 calibers. As the design evolved, they put 20 millimeters. As we're approaching the end of the war, we, kind of the Western allies, finally start making the 20 millimeter work. Early in the war, it was unreliable. It would freeze, it would jam, so we stuck with the 50 cal. As the war progressed, like we usually do, we figured it out. Okay, so the result of this, it was 20% lighter. That's relative to the Hellcat, big brother over there. It had a 30% better climb rate. Let's go back to Jimmy Thatch. What do we need? Climb rate. And it was 50 miles per hour faster. That's pretty significant. When you look at what the top speeds were at like the middle of the war, adding 50 miles per hour was a very large percentage increase. So what does that sound like to me? That thing's a prop rocket and a real hellion. First prototype flew in August of '44. So you do the math again. They started in late '43 designing it. So roughly a year from initial design to a flying airplane. It was into production in October. Deliveries to the Navy started in February of '45. And the first operational Navy squadron end of May in '45. I think those who know the airplane know that it was too late to see combat, but an operational squadron or unit were on carriers steaming to the Pacific when the Japanese surrendered. So it was that close. The Blue Angels in '46 said we have to have it. So it was the second aircraft. That was the first aircraft the Blue Angels flew. This was the second. The improved F8F-2, which we have a -2. That came off the production line in '48. I have a slide about some of the differences. The production ended in '49, fairly short-lived production cycle, and it was withdrawn from service in '52 because of the jets. Now the jets are starting to get developed and be functional in an operational sense. And so let's put jets out there on the carriers. So here's some differences of the F8F-2. They modified the cowling. I probably spent more time preparing this, trying to find a good picture of the differences in the cowling, and this is the best I could do. And these are modelers. These are plastic 1/48 scale cowlings for a model. If you can barely see, here's the -1, what I'll call a little bit more square right up on the top, and the -2, they just curved it a little bit. So they modified the cowling. They put a taller tail on it. And here, these are all -1s, different variants. These are the -2s on this side. This picture right here kind of best shows a slightly taller vertical tail. Here you can see by this time we got the 20 millimeters figured out. So let's put those in there. If you do get behind, you'll see on the wings these bubbles that come out of the flat surface of the wing. Those are to house the larger breeches of the 20 millimeter cannons. And as if 2,000 horsepower was enough, we went from the -34W to the -30, which went from roughly 2,100 to 2,240 horsepower on this real A lot of people call this a war-winning engine, the 2800. Who can tell me what the W stands for? Nope. What's the W stand for? Water injection. Okay, down and dirty on the design and development, a little bit of the service of the Hellcat. What we're going to do now, I'm going to introduce Ron Fleischman. He's our unit historian, and he is going to talk about the history of this particular airplane right behind me.
Morning. I know, talk into the microphone. Thank you, Arash. Thought I'd beat you to it this time. Numbers. The game is all numbers with these things when you start checking them out. This is a Grumman F8F-2P. The -2 model, P stands, it had photography stuff on it, so they can use this for recon. The last military serial number it had, well, let's go ahead. Roll down the line at Grumman, D1227. That's the Grumman production number. The Navy got it, 122674, United States Navy. And then I lose track of the numbers. I have not yet to find out what Navy squadron it served with, because there's about a 10-year gap from when the Navy got it until it became a civilian. We know it was constructed in 1949 on the 10th of March, made its first flight on 7 April 1949. And during that time, up till 1958, there's that 10-year span where still looking. We'll find it for the next time. It passed through the hands of several civilian owners. Ed Wiener in Los Angeles, Leo Demars from Aurora, Colorado, to Hamilton Aircraft, Larry Hamilton, Sonoma, California. Richard Tobey from Newport Beach, Paul Feinfrock from Hobart, Oklahoma, and then the CAF gets involved indirectly. Gary Levitz from Levitz Furniture was a CF member, was a race pilot, was very, very instrumental in some of these airplanes. He got the airplane in 1970. He had the certificate of airworthiness, and it became NX7825 Charlie. It goes to the Confederate Air Force, and it looked like this after a point. Go to the next slide. This is an interesting picture for us in here because the airplane in the back, 594, that's the Curtiss C-46 that's sitting out behind us right there. It was painted up, Navy markings, with 102 and a squadron letter of A. The CAF flew it. In 1972, on a ferry flight from Dallas to Harlingen, it had a forced landing. They repaired it. And then in 1974, an interesting accident report. It had another forced landing, and when he landed, nosed it over. And the report says there were no fatalities. The incident occurred a little bit after noon. The damage was substantial. It was a local flight from Harlingen, and this is if the engine failed or malfunctioned while cruising. The airplane nosed over during the landing roll. There was a complete power loss or failure in one engine. And then they add, the forward fuel tank was evident. This is report remarks include forward tank was empty. Wrong switch, what do you do? Repaired it, carried it out. At this point, it stayed down in Harlingen, used for air shows, till about 1994, 84 or so. And then the guys from Chino, the air race people, decided, so the story goes. Like William Randolph Hearst, if the story is better than the truth, tell the story. So I'm going to tell you the story the way it was told to me. They convinced headquarters in Harlingen, fly it up to Chino, they're going to restore it for us. Okay? From January the 23rd, 1984 to about 6 September 1991, they were working on it. Okay, can we go to the next slide? This may or may not be our airplane. This is an airplane similar to ours. Elmer Ward had a G58 or a F8F. All right, that's his? Okay. All right. So go to the next one. This one's ours. See the blue flight controls? Somewhere around this time, Steve and Joe Pepito go down to Chino. Joe identifies this as a CAF airplane. Headquarters issues a kind of a mandate to the group up here. Get the airplane back on CAF property. So they flew it back up here, and we worked on it for a number of years. Okay. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a Bearcat. Why? The Grumman trick of naming their fighters after some heroic, very vicious fighter like Cat. Somebody did not read their encyclopedia. I couldn't find a picture of it looking fierce. It seems to like small birds and bananas. But if anybody asks, what does a Bearcat look like? Voila, Bearcat. Okay. This very bad blurry picture, that's 25 Charlie. There was plans to make a racer out. That's a great paint job. But this probably was taken down at Chino. Or maybe Harlingen with the palm trees in the background. You know, in 1995, we were guests of the U.S. Navy aboard the Carl Vinson. We were celebrating at that time the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. And a bunch of us went up. Thank you. A bunch of us went up. That's Bill Montague in the cockpit. Steve can tell you more about how lightly loaded this airplane was and how the captain graciously gave us 40 knots over the deck. It just leaped into the sky. The interesting thing was they said, the interesting thing that the captain told us later, that this is really a family cruise. We're leaving half the guys at shore, so we only had 3,000 people with us, Navy, rather than 6. Next one. One more. That's warming up. And now we're going to show you a movie that takes place right after we got the airplane here in Camarillo.
Oh my God, it's a broken down, beat up Bearcat. I think that's Leslie Gardner nursing it in.
How about the prop? A lot of times these things will leak right here. You know, they will run down underneath the engine and go right out. Okay. But it goes under. It took it 6 months to get all leaks. Like old age.
Getting ready to hook it up, we hope.
Let the hoist down. Hoist or the crane? The crane. Crane's coming down. Whatever that thing is.
3,000 pounds plus 1,000 pounds of shipping container. Rolling out the Bearcat, getting ready for its first flight.
Boy, those goddamn brakes dragging, eh?
Who's going to be the pilot? Never get back together. September 26, 1992. Just come back.
New oil, look at that. Everything brand new, man.
You mean they actually put new hoses on this
Oh,
time? Isn't
yeah,
that
new
amazing?
hoses, new clamps, everything new.
thing of beauty. It'll never look that clean again.
What's your name?
Gary Barber.
Turn around and look at me, Gary.
Gary Cussing Barber. I'm working on airplanes, and that's why I'm cussing. Well, believe it or not, I think we're going to have this portion of it finished here.
No way. I have an outlet that goes into this box. It's right here. So I'm going to run it into that box, and then. So he wants to put both the push-to-talk and the remote transfer on the stick.
On the stick, yeah. It's a single pole double throw, or
single pole double throw.
So when the voltage, when it's high, it's one way, and when it's low, it's the other way.
You got to go from one and then back to make it flip.
Single pole double throw.
Don't waste your film on that critical.
Okay, are you up there?
Oh, yeah, just run.
Anybody in the cockpit?
Wait a minute. That's all right. Hold on. Better nothing.
The jack's in the wrong place up there. So what we want to do is take those out. And you know where it's got the circuit breakers on the side? I think let's put it right there. You know,
Yeah, it should be all the way in the back.
yeah, as far back as I can get them. So when it comes off our helmet, plug it there and it's out of your way.
That way you won't hit with the maps.
Right.
Joe, you need to run the primer to make sure it works.
Got a left mag got a problem.
Left mag, cylinder head don't work, top temp don't work, and the suction low.
Handed Joe a roll of toilet paper. I don't understand that.
Well, Dick, why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you go around the airplane and check and make sure that everything's working right with the aileron trim too? So that left, I mean, we've gone over this thing 100 times. The goddamn rigging book tells you that this is the way to do it. It drives you crazy watching it, but
That's to get the rubber band tight.
Center Alpha, taxi right side for the Cherokee, entering on your right, and then left side around the Bearcat. They got wing walkers over there.
October 1, 1993.
That's all right.
Lefty Gardner at the
They
control.
taking them right there, Confederate? Okay.
He's rolling. Here comes our bird back.
how'd you run, Lefty? Perfect? All right. Hey. Good job. Hey, good job.
Hey, good job. Congratulations. Fly my airplane anytime. time. The other day when I flew it, you gave me a gift, a presentation. I want to give you one. Now I'd be able to keep that long if I kept mine. All right, thank you. I believe in miracles, all right. Not every day, but Joe, this is a miracle. Doing all that kind of work on an airplane. And no complaint. Flaps worked okay? Flaps? Well, the gear came right up. Nothing dripping, nothing running out. Let's go get a beer or something, Lefty. Okay, then I'll give you that back. All right.
Okay, guys, congratulations to everybody, man. You guys did a hell of a job.
All right. There you go.
Gary, you're hitting Gary. Oh, no, that's the sweetest airplane I ever flown.
Since that time, we've been flying the airplane quite successfully.
I'm Jason. Hello, everybody. Doesn't know me. Oh, this is, I guess this is Reno. Steve and I got the opportunity to take these airplanes up to Reno. Steve was in the Hellcat. I got to fly the Bearcat, which is super cool, around the pylons at Reno to qualify to race. The CAF said, hey, go for it. It's a good money-making opportunity. And followed through with, well, maybe not this year. We're not going to race. So we at least got to go to rookie school. And here's some video from it. There's our instructor airplane, a T-28. And there's Steve in the Hellcat over there. Like I said, I haven't seen this, so I don't know what to say. For those of you who know about Reno, we're going around the back of Peavine. Well, now we're on the front side of Peavine. So this is a simulated race start. He was the pace plane, but now I'm just acting like he's a regular racer. So what we have to do is come down in formation like you're starting with the guys and demonstrate a pass or two, and then some simulated engine outs. So I don't know what, I think we're going to show the pass here in a little bit. And as you can assume, following a T-28 around is pretty easy in a Bearcat. But he said, hey, just get some space behind him. This may be follow the leader. I don't know what sequence this is. Okay, yeah, I guess I passed him around. This is pylon 4 at Reno we're going around. Then you drop down pylon 5 and then enter the valley speed for those of you that are familiar with Reno. So this is the far north side of the airport at Stead Field. So now you flatten out and go to the valley speed. And I selected to pass him after it says pylon 6, I believe. The camera makes it look not so great, but so I like just to pass him here. There's no really rules, so I just went ahead and passed him. So here's my first opportunity to put a little speed on the airplane and get down the course and fly the course for the first time. So now I've got him, you know, well past, of course. Power's up a bit. There's pylon 7. Pylon 8's coming up. This is where all the photographers are, so I tend to put the airplane in future laps on top of pylon 8 quite a lot to get a good picture. Pylon 9, which I cut a ton because I don't like it. And then on to home pylon, which is the start-finish. Pylon 1. Oh, this is the simulated. So here's the simulated engine out. So even in a Bearcat, you know, not carrying much power, it's amazing. You'll see in a minute here how much altitude you gain. So what I did is basically pull off the course, pull the throttle back. Oh, I guess you won't see that. Oh, okay, so now we're watching the same thing from a helmet camera. If I pick my nose, I apologize. I do it a lot. Okay, gotcha. So here we go, valley speed is kind of a straight run. You roll wings level when you descend. The course is actually elevated about 220 feet from the north to the south end. So you're actually diving down now. It's the fastest part of the course. You're unloaded and you're going fast. Here we go, setting up for pylon 7. It's the same video, same from the last, just a cockpit view. Pylon 8 and the optional pylon 9. Yeah. And then on to home pylon. Pylon 9 was put there to slow the course down a little bit. Because coming at 8, you can really pull it to home pretty nice. There's pylon 1, and then on up to the simulated engine out again. You know, you gain several thousand feet, and all you're looking down at is runways. Reno is full of runways. So, all right, so this is, I think I came out of the hold, And this is probably a couple laps with some decent power on. Climb up the hill to pylon 4, setting up for that. You know, finding the course is easy. Flying the course perfectly is impossible. You know, every time you change how you enter a pylon, probably like car racing, every angle you change entering the pylon, it's going to change the next pylon. So it was a good learning event. I'd raced before, but never on this course. So this was really good for me. And we got as many laps till we got tired. It was kind of nice. We got to fly a bunch. So now we're coming down the valley of speed. That's a guide pylon. You have to be above that pylon height. There is a minimum height requirement. Your head has to be above the pylons at all times. Pylon 7. There's 8 with the photographers. I actually went around 9 that time. That's good. And then on through home. I think if we show another lap or two, I won't quite do that. Also, now we're doing the same thing again, I guess, from the cockpit view. My lips, I'm always licking my lips. It's interesting watching a cockpit video yourself. You see all the nervous tics you have. I lick my lips, I pick my nose, I do all kinds of things I shouldn't be doing. You know, fat, like 200, coming out, that's 260, 270 knots right now. Not super fast. We are pretty high altitude, so that translates to better ground speed. It's a pretty good one into 7, 8. Oh, this is same before, so I'm not that tight on 8. Yeah, and then on through the home pylon. And then again here, you have to be above the R of Reno when you cross home pylon. It's kind of the rules, and they're watching for that. They don't like you flying low, because you know the old adage, you can't tie the the altitude record for low flying. You can only tie it. You can't beat it. That's what it is. Sorry. Climbing up to pylon 4. There's 3. 4 you can't see. Use a guide pylon. There's some lights up there to tell you kind of where it's going to be. It's tucked around behind the mountain, so you actually can't see pylon 4. But it was a great experience. I mean, for me, I've always dreamt of going around the pylons at Reno, and to do it in this airplane, I mean, come on. There's no luckier guy out there, you know? And thanks to Steve for letting me do it, because he got in the old clunker there, which is a great airplane, but a little different. Sir? Okay. 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 I guess is it the Reno air race? Was this just recently? Yeah. Okay. So this is we performed at the show. We didn't race this year. We performed Hellcat, Bearcat, PBJ, and Zero. I did some aerobatics there, so I guess this is a half Cuban 8 or something. So coming in, that's probably about 280 to 300 knots. About 3.5 Gs here. You'll probably see in the cockpit video, kind of looking back and forth for your line. Come over the top, set your line, roll out. Did you show? At least you didn't show the bad one. That one wasn't bad. Just kind of a half cube in there. Did you go to the cockpit footage? Oh, no cockpit footage. Okay. So that's just a half cube in there. At Reno this year. Okay. Okay. So I guess I'm in the slot here. I haven't seen this video either. In the is this at Reno? At Reno as well. Oh yeah, cool. There's a 360 camera, I guess. And again, the cameras don't do it. The cameras don't really do it justice. You know, when you're in the airplanes, it's a lot closer. You know, than so it looks like we're kind of all spread apart, but it's really quite close. That's our PBJ up front. That's the one that's on the ramp, and the Hellcat there that you see, and the Zero's in the maintenance hangar. Little banana pass at Reno. Steve Barber's in the Hellcat, I believe. Lips, I think you're in the Zero on this one, or maybe you're in the Hellcat. I don't know. A super airplane to fly. It's my favorite. You know, it's I always say, you know, if I had a choice of any airplane to have here, it'd be this one. It's a great airplane for going out for a half an hour. If you're going to fly cross country, you get in a Mustang or a Hellcat. But for 20, 30 minutes, you can't beat this thing. It's just a lot of fun.
Thank you, Jason. Great. Great footage there. Okay, we're moving on here. Here's just some factoids for you about the Bearcat. It was initially designed with snap-off wingtips. They wanted to help the pilot be able to pull the G's he needed without having to worry about damaging or bending the airplane. About from the inside of the ailerons out were constructed so that if the pilot needed to pull over 7.5 G's, they would snap off and the airplane still be flyable. Well, they didn't go real well, right? They ended up going from the snap off to an explodable, so they were rigged with explosives to blow them off because they had some asymmetric. That doesn't float very well if you lose half of one wing and not the other. And then they had an accident on the carrier where the carrier landing, one blew off and injured a sailor. So they said, great idea in concept, but it's not working in the operational fleet. Okay, it held the time to climb. Boy, let's go back to slide 4. Initial concept, climb rate. Well, it held the time to climb record 10 years into the jet age. That's pretty, and there it is. It was an unmodified -1 that got to 10,000 feet in a minute and a half from a standstill. Okay, and we kind of hit, it didn't see any combat under an American flag, though it did as a bomb dropper, a ground attack aircraft. It served under the French flag in the Indochina War, just before America got involved in Vietnam, blah, blah. Okay, I'm gonna hand the mic over to Steve Barber, another one of our longtime Bearcat pilots, and he's gonna talk to you about flying this thing. Steve.
I'll try not to bore you to death. A couple things on the reason Grumman put the blow-off wingtips on the airplane was the Bearcat is the first and last Grumman airplane they built without an overabundance of structural integrity. What I mean is, when the Hellcat was designed, the government came out and said, look, we want to have a 9G aircraft, positive, and for safety. So Grumman said, fine. Well, they built it to 120% of 9Gs. When they built the Bearcat, the government said, we want 7.5G airplane. That's all you got on the Grumman. And they did it for lightness, so it would climb. So they put the wingtips there that if they came off, in theory, you would stall the airplane before you would overload it and pull a wing off. So that's kind of the design theory on that. And we have Spanish wing folds on this, Manuel, on both sides. There's no hydraulics. They're 100% manual. And again, to save weight, there's no hydraulic cylinders. We call that Spanish design here in California. Flying the airplane is pretty straightforward. I'm not the smallest guy in the world. I use Vaseline jelly when I eat too much to get in the cockpit. The good news is once I'm in there, you don't rattle around very much. It's right up against the sides, and it's really good in turbulence, as Jason can tell you. You get strapped in that thing and you feel like, wow, that's cool. Flying the airplane is just like any other fighter that we have. Starting, I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail, but to start the airplane, it's a typical radial. You turn the boost pump on, you have the mixture idle cutoff, throttle cracked maybe an inch and a half. You hit the start button, get 4 or 5 blades, turn the mags on, and start the prime. And it will fire on the primer. Once it fires, you let go of the starter switch, hold the prime, wait till you get oil pressure. When the oil pressure comes up, move the mixture control up, and the engine will start stumbling because now it's getting too much fuel. It's getting fuel from the carburetor and the prime. Let go of the primer, and if you've done everything just right, it's running smoothly at idle. Now, when you hear the airplanes backfire and stuff, when you see guys trying to start them, that's because they didn't do it right or the airplane's not being cooperative. It's not really by the numbers, it's magic. Each airplane is a little different. You got to learn its magic, and once you do, you don't have trouble. And I'm not kidding. Every airplane's a little bit different. I won't tell you it's like one of the wives I've had, but they're all different, okay? I don't want to tell you. So now, so anyway, once the oil temperature gets up to 40 degrees centigrade, you can taxi. And actually in this airplane, you can taxi before that because you don't have to use any additional power. It'll taxi just fine on idle. Once you're at 40 degrees C or more, you get out and of course you go through your checklist, you check the trim, you check the control movements, the fuel. Nice part about this airplane without drop tanks, the fuel's either on or it's off. It's pretty easy not to get confused on this airplane. If it ain't running, the fuel's off. If it's running, it's on, or you have fuel, right? So once you're ready to do a run-up, we typically on a radial engine, there's problems with radial engine. Here's the problem. You could have 5 cylinders out, not working at all on a radial, and on a run-up, you would know it. It'd be smooth as glass. So if you haven't flown the airplane for a while, we do what we call a barometric check. And what that is, you run it up to, in this case, you're sitting here at sea level pretty much, get up to 29 inches, put the power up to 29 inches. The book says you should have 2,300 RPMs plus or minus 25. If you have less than that, you've got a cylinder out. And if you got a lot less than that, you got more than one cylinder out. So that's really the only way in a radial that you can check that all the cylinders are running. So do a barometric and then check the mags. And unlike a pancake engine or a V engine, when you go to a mag, like go to right mag, let it sit there for 10, 15 seconds. You don't have to hurry. Because if you have a problem, it's not going to show up immediately. It's going to take a few seconds. Go back to both. Go to the left, same thing. Let it set for a minute and then back, and you know you're doing good. Exercise the prop. Make sure you get the RPM change. Anybody notice anything different about this propeller and that propeller? No. Forget the number of blades. All right. Notice that one has a dome, what we call a dome, prop dome on the front. This one has no prop dome. What they found during World War II, and this was the bomber patrol specifically, they get up in a big bomber stream, B-17, B-24, whatever, and every once in a while they get a runaway prop. The thing would just run away, and then if they didn't shut it down right away, they were in big trouble. What was happening is it was 20, 30, 40 degrees below zero at the altitude they were flying. The oil that operates those propellers with a dome on it would start congealing. So what they found is the crew would have to take the prop controls about every 5 minutes, move them back and forth to pump warm oil back up, or else they get a runaway prop. And if you get a runaway prop on a bomber, it's really bad because what will happen is you can't control it. It'll go to flat pitch. The engine will over rev and eventually the crankshaft will break and that prop's going to go somewhere. And a lot of times it went right into the airplane. So these smart people at Aero Products said, well, wait a minute, we'll use hydraulic fluid to run this propeller. It doesn't congeal at 40 below, it stays liquid. So that round drum you see behind the propeller, excuse me, it's just like a torque converter on a transmission. Once that prop's turning, you got hydraulic pressure, and that's how it controls the pitch of the blades. Just a little. And the other thing that's different on this one, if you'll tap that blade over there and tap this one, this is steel. Aero Products props are hollow steel. They took two halves, they bronzed them together, and then they pumped in nitrogen, got all the oxygen out so it wouldn't rust from the inside out. So that's the difference. Anyway, a couple little items there. All right, so you do your run-up. Everything's looking good. Oil pressure's good. Check the trim again. And on the Bearcat especially, you want to make sure the friction lock is tight. If you take off and go for the gear and that isn't tight, the throttle will come right back on you. And you can always tell the new guy takes off in the Bearcat. He can't get his hand down to the gear because it's the prop keeps coming back. The other thing on the Bearcat, the gear speed is 140 knots, and it does not take long to get there. So what you do is once you take off, you get a pretty good steep climb going, reach down, get the gear, get it up. Now, what do you use for takeoff? Well, our engine builder tells us to use 50 inches of manifold pressure. 50 inches, 2,700 RPMs, and that'll, 28, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, 28, all these different airplanes. And this thing will move. At 50 inches, this thing, it'll lay in the seat and it'll go. and it's a lot of fun. And as Jason can testify, that demonstrates a lot, high performance takeoff in this thing, put it in, get the gear up, and just leave climb power or takeoff power, and this thing just climbs. It'll do 3,000 to 4,000 feet a minute for as long as you leave the power in. The guy that broke the time to climb record, Corky Meyer, I happen to know him pretty good, passed away now, but I chatted with him. I said, how'd you do that? And he said, well, we took a Bearcat, took the armor plate out, took the guns out, put 40 gallons of 115, 145, filled the ADI tank. What's ADI? Everybody know what ADI is? Anti-detonation injection fluid, which is 50% alcohol, 50% distilled water, and it's injected into the blower to keep the engine from detonating. Anyway, he did all of that. They took a rope, tied the rope around the tail hook, tied the tail hook to a tug, had a Navy guy back there with an axe. He ran it up to max power, 63.5 inches, told the guy to cut. The guy slammed the thing, he took off, bounced it in the air, sucked the gear up, and went straight up till it quit. Burned up the 40 gallons of gas, he glided back down and landed. That was takeoff to 10,000 feet in 94 seconds. So, and the first airplane to beat it, F-16. The nice part about this airplane, and I'm going to just sum it up for you, the greatest part about the airplane is that Grumman, all through the war, learned little tricks how to make the airplane fly better. And remember, all of these airplanes were made to have this 19-year-old kid bring him aboard a ship out in the middle of the frickin' ocean. The ship's going up and down, the weather's crappy, so it had to fly well at low speed. And to take off, even with all this torque and all this horsepower, this short, stubby airplane, they learned the lessons. If you sit in the cockpit and you look in the review mirror, you can see that the vertical stabilizer is offset 6 degrees. The engine's offset 2 degrees. You can't see that, but it is. So what that translates to, when you set the trim, it's 0, 0, 0. The only fighter that I've ever flown that's 0. You put the wood to it, and the only thing that happens is the airplane will torque, but it goes straight. And the book, if you read the book, it says, caution, do not use too much right rudder on takeoff. You're going, what? Huh? And they're not kidding. It wants to go straight. You do have to keep it straight, but it wants to go straight. So that's the nicest part about the airplane. So once you get the altitude, wherever you're going, pitch it over, little nose down trim, tiny bit of left rudder, and you're done. You don't have to touch it again until you land. Aerobatics, whatever, you don't have to touch it. It's sweet. Speaking of aerobatics, one of the reasons the pilots like to fly it, when you walk around the airplane, if you look at the trailing edge of the ailerons, you will see tabs on both ailerons. That's a combination of a trim tab and a flying tab. If you held both ailerons when the wings are down and moved the stick, the ailerons won't move, but the tabs will move. The tabs fly the ailerons, and that's why it doesn't matter if you're going 100 knots or 400 knots, just things like flying a Cadillac up in the sky. It does get heavier on the pitch when you load it up, but the ailerons are really nice at whatever speed you're at. So, landing, again, made to come aboard a carrier. Gear speed 140 knots, flaps down, gear down, nose up trim. You're going to run about 110 knots on final, 100 on short final, 90 knots on touchdown. Sweet as you can be. If you stall the airplane, for those of you that are pilots, everybody says, how's it stall? Well, a Mustang always wants to roll on you. The Yak wants to do that. The Hellcat and the Bearcat, you load it up, and as long as you got the ball in the center, it'll stall. As soon as you release it, it's flying again. Doesn't want to snap on you. It doesn't want to do any weird stuff. So anyway, Grumman got it right. Do you have any questions? Yes, Matt. Does it fly when the engine stops? Well, I can answer that question for you. And Jason was my chase plane when I lost the engine over, where was that? Just east of, go ahead. Don't tell him the ending, though. Don't tell him the ending.
I'll let you tell the ending. So we're going to a show, Riverside, and Steve's great. You know, he lets us fly whatever. He's the grand poobah. This is a funny story. Sorry, you guys, not that technical, but it is cute. So we're going to Riverside, and I said, hey, Steve, what do you get first choice. What do you want to fly this weekend? He goes, I don't care. I'll fly whatever. All right, cool. So I'm thinking, I'm next in line. I'm number 2. I said, I'm going to take the Bearcat, right? So I show up here on a Friday, and Steve's here early, which, it happens. And the wings are spread. I go, hey, Steve, why'd you spread the wings on the Bearcat? He goes, I'm going to fly it. I said, okay. So I jump in the Hellcat, and another one of our pilots jumps in the Zero, and no big deal. We fly the show and go out and have a few drinks wherever we do. And next morning, we do a routine where we do some air-to-air combat simulation with the Zero and the Hellcat. And Steve and I kind of started that together many, many years ago, but he hadn't done it in a while because the new guys fly the Hellcat and the Zero, and he hadn't done it. So I say, hey, Steve, what are you going to fly in the air show today? He goes, I'm going to fly the Bearcat. I go, well, you haven't done that routine in a while. Maybe you should get recurring. He goes, no, I'm going to fly the Bearcat. Okay. So I fly the routine with Zero, no big deal. And next morning, same deal. He wants to fly the Bearcat. So now we're going to go home. We're loaded up Sunday night. We're coming home. Short flight from Riverside here, and the Zero's leading. And I said, hey, Steve, what are you going to fly home? He goes, no, I'm going to fly the Bearcat. I said, okay. So I'm not flying the Bearcat this weekend. I'm flying my buddy, my favorite, So here we're a little funnier story. Going down was blowing like it was him. He was blowing bad. And he was bitching at us for not flying a good formation. But it was blowing like hell. He's like, you guys, what kind of Air Force formation you flying? Or, giving us some crap. So coming home, I'm number 2 in the Hellcat, and the Bearcat's lagging. He's back there, and I'm like, oh, this is the guy that was giving us crap the other day. Where is he? I go, hey, Steve, what's going on back there? He goes, it's not running real well. So we're heading home. We're about cruise altitude, and he finally gets up next to me, and he's blowing black smoke out pretty good. I said, Steve, auto lean? He goes, I've done all that. It's not running real great. And we're on center. We're talking to air traffic control. So they can kind of hear this in the background. And then all of a sudden, this thing starts making white smoke like you wouldn't believe, like a smoke system got turned on. I said, Steve, you're blowing white smoke. He's like, yeah, it's not good. I need to put it down. He goes, I'm going to Burbank. Okay, we're pretty close to Burbank. And the ATC was great. They said, clear to land any runway. This is not the control tower. This is SoCal. We're up high. Clear to land any runway. They coordinate with Burbank. And he goes, what's the winds? And they go, 15010. He goes, I'll take 15. So, Steve, you have to make your way over at some point. So as Steve's going down and I'm following him down, I'm sitting myself going, man, am I glad I'm not flying the Bearcat. So Steve does a wonderful job putting the airplane. I'll let him go into the details of the glide and all that. So I'll let you finish the story, Steve, and then you could do your little.
Well, if I'd have had time, I would have been thinking that son of a bitch should have been in this airplane. But I was a little busy at the time. The interesting thing is, years ago, when Lefty Gardner checked me out in fighters, he said, here's the good news with the Pratt & Whitney, it will talk to you. Well, it was talking. I was looking, and it was just, I could feel it decelerating. And I looked at the manifold pressure, I looked at the oil pressure, temps, everything was exactly the way it was, except I could feel it decelerate. So they got these guys to look, oh yeah. So we were at 6,500 coming home. I immediately started a climb, trying to get some altitude. We had just passed the Rose Bowl, if I remember right. I got to 7,200 feet, and the engine went, you're all done, boy. So these guys were great. They got on the radio, told them, in the distance I could see airliners leaving the area, which was nice. They got them out of the way. Everybody asked me how the Bearcat flies. Well, it's got stubby little wings on it and stuff, and the prop the engine was starting to seize, and I could see the blades moving. I went, oh, crap. And I still had to get the gear down. The best angle of glide speed on this airplane with clean is 140 knots. I barely got 120, and I was coming down pretty good. Well, I had to get the gear down. Jason's following me in, making sure I'm okay. And I got the gear down, and now this thing I was really going down. Just to tell you how quick this goes down, I hit the center of the crossing of the 2 runways at 3,000 feet indicated. By the time I turned, got the gear down, and turned final, I barely made the runway. Now, here's the next part. I turned and got it on the runway. The prop stopped. It seized right there when I touched down. So Jason flying by, and he goes, you didn't land on the center line. I think I saluted him as he went over. I'm not sure. But anyway, and now the rest of the story. They had asked me as I was coming down to switch to tower. I didn't even answer them. I was a little busy trying to make the airport. So I jumped out of the airplane. It smelled. I thought it was going to catch fire. It was smelling really bad, metal on metal. And I jumped out. Fire department was right there. It was fine. car comes driving up. You need to call the control tower right away. And I went, oh, crap. So I call him up. You flying the Bearcat? Yes, sir. Hey, great job, man. We just want to say we're glad you made it on the ground. I went, okay. Next thing that happens, 2 cop cars drive up. They went, man, that was really cool. And I went, what? I said, would you want to see me crash? Oh, no, no, no. He said, you did a great job. Man, I was smoking. It looked. He said, I just want to let you know you did a good job, because if you'd have crashed, we'd have had hours of paperwork to do. So then Jason lands. They taxi in, and I say, hey, Jason, see if you can move the prop. Well, he was doing pull-ups on that thing, didn't move. It was frozen. I said, is there any oil left? He gets up there, and that dipstick there wasn't a drop on it. So anyway, it turned out, make a long story short, the rear master rod on the engine let go. And I don't know if you know how a radial engine operates, but look it up sometime. There's 2 master rods to run the front and rear set of cylinders. And the bearing in the rear master rod failed. I called the engine shop. He had to cut the engine apart with a torch because it was welded together. And I asked him what failed, and he said it was the rear master rod. And I said, well, what happened? He said, when we assemble these engines, you got 50 to 60 thousandths clearance in the rod between the bearing and the crank. Yeah. He said, you had 2.5 inches. So what was happening was, as the thing was deteriorating, the pistons were coming out of the bottom of the cylinders. The bottom rings were breaking off. It was just coming apart. So anyway, it was talking to me. Pratt & Whitney talked to me. I had good wingman to bring me down, handle the radios. So, but the Bearcat comes down like a greased crowbar if that prop stops. So if you ever wanted to know what you would do is open the canopy, throw the greased crowbar out, turn the engine off, and see which one hit the ground first. I think it's going to be the Bearcat. Any questions? Thanks a lot for coming.
I think we've hit our question and answers. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Keep our eye on social media and our website for our next event. And please don't forget, those interested, give us 2 minutes to get the cord out of your way. And if you want to jump up on the ladder and take a peek inside the cockpit, please do. Thank you very much.